Fallout New Vegas was released in 2010 and occupies a unique position in the Fallout series because it was developed under very specific circumstances that shaped nearly every aspect of the final game. Unlike Fallout 3, which was built as a full reboot of the franchise, New Vegas was designed as a continuation that relied heavily on existing systems while shifting focus back toward role-playing depth, player choice, and narrative consequence. Understanding how and why the game was made provides important context for many of its design decisions. Development of Fallout New Vegas was handled by Obsidian Entertainment, a studio composed largely of developers who had previously worked on the original Fallout and Fallout 2 at Black Isle Studios. This meant that many of the people shaping New Vegas were returning to the universe they helped create years earlier. Their familiarity with Fallout's tone, themes, and lore influenced the game's emphasis on moral ambiguity, political complexity, and long-term consequences. Bethesda Softworks, which owned the Fallout intellectual property at the time, provided Obsidian with the Gamebryo engine, core assets, and systems developed for Fallout 3. This allowed Obsidian to build New Vegas more quickly, but it also imposed strict limitations. The development schedule was unusually short for a role-playing game of this scope, reportedly around 18 months from concept to release. This compressed timeline had a significant impact on content scope, stability, and polish. Despite the limited time frame, Obsidian chose to set New Vegas in the Mojave Desert, a region closely tied to the events of the original Fallout games. This decision was deliberate. The West Coast setting allowed the developers to reintroduce factions, themes, and historical consequences from earlier titles without directly repeating them. The Mojave is geographically and politically distinct, but still connected to the broader post-war history of the Fallout universe. The game takes place in the year 2281, 4 years after the events of Fallout 3. By this point in the timeline, the world has moved beyond immediate post-war survival. Societies have formed, trade routes exist, and political power struggles dominate the region. This temporal distance from the Great War allows New Vegas to focus less on shock and discovery and more on governance, ideology, and long-term survival. One of the defining design goals of New Vegas was player agency. From its earliest planning stages, the game was intended to support multiple endings, branching quests, and faction-driven outcomes. Rather than positioning the player as a predetermined savior, New Vegas casts the player as an independent actor whose decisions influence the balance of power. This approach reflects Obsidian's philosophy that role-playing games should prioritize choice over spectacle. The courier, the player character, is intentionally given a minimal predefined backstory. Unlike the lone wanderer or the sole survivor, the courier's identity is largely shaped by player actions rather than personal history. This design choice allows players to project motivations onto the character without being constrained by emotional obligations or familial ties. The central plot revolves around a delivery gone wrong rather than a personal tragedy or destiny. Technically, New Vegas inherited many systems from Fallout 3, including combat mechanics, dialogue frameworks, and environmental design tools. However, Obsidian expanded and modified these systems to better support role-playing. The reputation system replaced Fallout 3's karma-focused morality, allowing factions to react differently to the player based on specific actions rather than abstract moral alignment. This reputation system is one of New Vegas's most important structural features. Instead of judging actions as universally good or evil, the game tracks how different groups perceive the player. Helping one faction may alienate another, and neutrality is often difficult to maintain. This system reinforces the game's central theme that power and morality are contextual rather than absolute. Another foundational element of New Vegas is its political structure. The Mojave Wasteland is contested by multiple factions, each with its own ideology, strengths, and flaws. The New California Republic represents expansionist democracy. Caesar's Legion embodies authoritarian order. Mr. House offers technocratic control, and independent paths emphasize localized autonomy. None of these options are presented as clearly correct. The presence of these factions reflects Obsidian's interest in exploring governance rather than heroism. The conflict over Hoover Dam is not about stopping an existential threat, but about determining who gets to shape the future of the region. This focus on infrastructure and power generation grounds the story in practical concerns rather than symbolic victories. New Vegas's world design supports this grounded approach. The Mojave is sparse, open, and deliberately paced. Travel distances are significant, and landmarks are often visible long before they are reached. This design encourages exploration without overwhelming the player with constant encounters. The environment itself communicates the slow, deliberate nature of the region's conflicts. The game's writing reflects a similar philosophy. Dialogue is dense, information rich, and often understated. Characters speak pragmatically, discussing logistics, history, and political realities rather than dramatic monologues. This restraint contributes to the game's distinctive tone, which feels quieter and more contemplative than other Fallout entries. Music and sound design also reinforce this atmosphere. The radio stations feature period-appropriate music that contrasts with the harsh environment, while ambient sounds emphasize wind, distant machinery, and silence. These audio elements contribute to a sense of isolation and continuity rather than urgency. From a production standpoint, New Vegas faced significant technical challenges. The reuse of Fallout 3's engine introduced bugs and performance issues that were difficult to resolve within the available timeframe. At launch, the game was criticized for instability despite its strong writing and design. Over time, patches and community fixes improved its reputation. Despite these challenges, New Vegas gained a dedicated following. Players responded positively to its depth, replayability, and narrative complexity. Over the years, it has come to be regarded as one of the most respected entries in the series, particularly among fans of role-playing mechanics and world building. The game's downloadable content further expanded its themes. Each DLC explored different aspects of Fallout's philosophical core, from obsession and survival to technology and control. While these expansions vary in tone, they reinforce the idea that the Mojave is shaped by long histories and unresolved conflicts. In retrospect, Fallout New Vegas represents a convergence of old and new design philosophies. It uses modern systems to tell stories rooted in classic Fallout themes. Its development constraints forced focus and efficiency, resulting in a game that prioritizes depth over scale. The foundations laid during its development influence every aspect of the experience. The pacing, tone, and structure all reflect deliberate choices shaped by time, resources, and creative intent. New Vegas does not rush the player. It invites observation, consideration, and gradual understanding. This approach makes it particularly suited to quiet exploration. The Mojave unfolds slowly, revealing its history through dialogue, locations, and consequences rather than exposition. The game rewards patience and attentiveness, rather than speed. As a result, Fallout New Vegas establishes itself not through spectacle, but through accumulation. Details layer over time, choices echo later. The world remembers what the player does, often subtly. These foundations set the stage for everything that follows. The factions, locations, mechanics, and themes introduced here form the framework for the rest of the game's experience. Understanding how New Vegas was built helps explain why it feels the way it does. It is a game shaped by constraints, guided by experience, and defined by its willingness to let the player exist quietly within a world that does not revolve entirely around them. And from this starting point, the Mojave becomes a place not of urgency, but of slow, unfolding consequence, where history moves forward not through destiny, but through decisions made one conversation, one journey, and one delivery at a time. The Mojave Wasteland in Fallout New Vegas is designed to feel open, dry, and deliberate, reflecting both the real-world Mojave Desert and the thematic goals of the game. Unlike the dense urban ruins of Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland, the Mojave emphasizes distance, visibility, and gradual discovery. This design choice shapes how players move through the world and how information is revealed over time. Geographically, the Mojave Wasteland is centered around southern Nevada, with the New Vegas Strip acting as a visual and narrative anchor. From many elevated locations, the Strip can be seen glowing in the distance, reinforcing its importance long before the player reaches it. This use of long sightlines is intentional. It creates a sense of place and orientation, allowing players to navigate by landmarks rather than maps alone. The terrain itself is largely arid, consisting of desert plains, rocky hills, dried lake beds, and scattered settlements. Vegetation is sparse, with scrub plants and cacti dominating the landscape. This scarcity reinforces the idea that resources are limited and that survival requires planning rather than improvisation. Roads play a critical role in Mojave navigation. Unlike Fallout 3, where exploration often involves weaving through ruins, New Vegas encourages travel along highways and trade routes. These roads connect settlements, military outposts, and industrial sites, reflecting the Mojave's function as a corridor for movement and commerce. The placement of roads also subtly guides player progression. Early routes are relatively safe but indirect, while more direct paths often pass through dangerous territory. This design teaches players to respect environmental cues and to assess risk before deviating from established routes. The Mojave's settlement distribution reflects its political landscape. Communities tend to cluster around water sources, trade hubs, or strategic locations. Places like Goodsprings, Prim, and Novak exist because they serve specific functions rather than arbitrary placement. This gives the world a sense of logic and continuity. Goodsprings, the starting town, is intentionally small and quiet. It introduces basic mechanics without overwhelming the player. Its isolation emphasizes the scale of the Mojave and the limited influence of any single settlement. From here, the world expands gradually rather than abruptly. Prim's location along a major highway illustrates the importance of trade and travel. Its condition reflects the instability of the region, where strategic value often attracts conflict. Novak, built around a pre-war roadside attraction, highlights how post-war communities repurpose existing structures rather than constructing new ones. Environmental storytelling is a key component of the Mojave's design. Many locations convey their history through layout, debris, and terminal entries rather than explicit narration. Abandoned camps, wrecked vehicles, and scattered supplies suggest past events without spelling them out. The desert environment allows these details to stand out. With fewer visual distractions, small clues become more noticeable. A single skeleton or overturned truck can imply an entire story. This minimalist approach suits the game's slower pacing. Radiation plays a less prominent role in the Mojave compared to other Fallout settings. While irradiated areas exist, they are not as central to exploration. This shift reflects the passage of time since the Great War and the Mojave's relative preservation. The danger here comes more from people and politics than environmental hazards. Weather in the Mojave is generally stable. There are no dynamic storms or dramatic climate shifts. This consistency reinforces the idea that the wasteland has settled into a long-term equilibrium. The world feels static, not because nothing happens, but because changes occur slowly. The absence of frequent environmental threats places greater emphasis on human conflict. Raiders, factions, and wildlife become the primary obstacles rather than radiation or collapsed infrastructure. This aligns with the game's focus on political struggle. Wildlife in the Mojave is adapted to the desert environment. Creatures like geckos, bighorners, and cazadores reflect the region's ecology. Their distribution is deliberate, with more dangerous creatures guarding high-value or isolated areas. Cazadores, in particular, function as environmental barriers. Their speed and poison make them deadly early on, discouraging direct travel through certain regions. This creates a natural progression system without artificial level gating. Deathclaws serve a similar role. Areas like Quarry Junction are clearly visible, but extremely dangerous. The presence of these creatures teaches players that not all locations are meant to be explored immediately. Visibility does not equal accessibility. The Mojave's layout encourages players to learn through observation. Enemy placement, terrain features, and road signs provide information without explicit instruction. This design rewards attention and patience. Verticality is used sparingly, but effectively. Elevated areas offer strategic advantages and visual context. From ridges and hills, players can survey large portions of the map, reinforcing the sense of scale. Interior locations contrast with the open desert. Vaults, bunkers, and facilities provide enclosed, structured environments. These interiors often feel claustrophobic compared to the vast exterior, emphasizing their artificial nature. The transition between open and enclosed spaces reinforces thematic contrasts. The desert represents freedom and exposure, while interiors represent control, secrecy, and confinement. This contrast echoes many of the game's narrative themes. The Strip itself is a carefully controlled environment. Unlike most settlements, it is gated, sanitized, and heavily monitored. Its clean appearance stands in stark contrast to the surrounding wasteland, highlighting the imbalance of power and resources. The Mojave Outpost and Hoover Dam are positioned to reflect their strategic importance. Their locations are not arbitrary. They exist where geography demands them, controlling access points and resource flow. Hoover Dam, in particular, is a centerpiece of environmental design. Its massive scale and industrial presence dominate the landscape. It represents both hope and conflict, as control of the dam determines the region's future. The Colorado River acts as a natural boundary. It separates the Mojave from Legion territory and serves as a symbolic dividing line between different ideologies. Crossing it feels significant, reinforcing the sense of entering contested space. Lighting in the Mojave is subdued and naturalistic. Bright daylight emphasizes exposure, while nighttime brings quiet isolation rather than constant danger. This reinforces the game's calm, contemplative tone. Sound design complements the environment. Wind, distant machinery, and sparse wildlife noises dominate. Silence is common, allowing moments of reflection between encounters. The Mojave's emptiness is intentional. It creates space for thought and choice. The player is not constantly reacting, but often traveling, listening, and observing. This design approach supports the game's role-playing focus. Without constant action, players can consider their decisions and motivations. The world does not rush them. The environmental design also reflects the passage of time. Structures have weathered naturally rather than collapsing dramatically. This suggests slow decay rather than sudden destruction. Pre-war remnants are integrated into the landscape rather than dominating it. Billboards, highways, and buildings are present but not overwhelming. They feel like leftovers rather than focal points. This balance reinforces the idea that the Mojave is not trapped in the moment of destruction. It has moved on, even if imperfectly. Overall, the Mojave Wasteland's geography and layout are designed to support a specific kind of experience. It is not about surprise or spectacle, but about continuity and consequence. The environment teaches players how the world works without overt explanation. It encourages steady exploration and gradual understanding. By emphasizing distance, visibility, and restraint, the Mojave creates a setting that feels grounded and lived in. It does not demand attention, it invites it. And through this quiet, deliberate design, the Mojave becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a participant in the story, shaping decisions not through force, but through space, silence, and the slow passage of time across an open desert. Fallout New Vegas places factions at the center of its narrative and mechanical design. Rather than serving as background flavor, factions actively shape the world, the player's experience, and the possible outcomes of the story. Each major group represents a different approach to governance, survival, and the use of power, and none of them are presented as purely good or purely evil. This emphasis on political balance and competing ideologies is one of the defining characteristics of New Vegas. The Mojave Wasteland is not a lawless vacuum. It is a contested region where order exists, but only in fragments. Power is unevenly distributed, constantly negotiated, and rarely absolute. This instability creates space for multiple factions to coexist, compete, and conflict without any single group fully dominating the region. The New California Republic is the most visibly established faction in the Mojave. It presents itself as a democratic government attempting to restore pre-war ideals such as law, representation, and civil infrastructure. The NCR has a formal military, a bureaucracy, a currency, and a recognizable chain of command. Its presence suggests progress and familiarity, especially compared to the chaos of the wasteland. However, the NCR is stretched thin. Its expansion into the Mojave is motivated as much by resource needs as by ideology. Hoover Dam represents electrical power, water control, and economic leverage. The NCR's interest in the region is practical rather than altruistic. This tension between stated ideals and material motivation is central to how the NCR functions. NCR troops are often undersupplied, poorly coordinated, and burdened by bureaucracy. Many soldiers express frustration with leadership, slow decision-making, and unclear objectives. This reflects the difficulties of maintaining a large-scale government in a post-apocalyptic environment. The NCR resembles a familiar nation-state, but without the infrastructure needed to fully support it. In contrast, Caesar's legion represents an entirely different philosophy. The legion is authoritarian, hierarchical, and openly brutal. It rejects democracy and individual freedom in favor of absolute order enforced through fear and discipline. Caesar models his society after his interpretation of ancient Rome, believing that civilization requires strength, unity, and unquestioned authority. The legion's power comes from its simplicity. Decisions are centralized. Orders are obeyed without hesitation. Resources are taken rather than negotiated for. This allows the legion to move quickly and maintain internal cohesion. However, this efficiency comes at a severe human cost. The legion suppresses individuality, erases cultural identity, and relies heavily on violence. Its society offers stability through control rather than consent. While it appears strong on the surface, its reliance on a single leader raises questions about long-term sustainability. Caesar himself is a critical component of the legion's structure. His ideology, charisma, and authority hold the faction together. Without him, the legion's future is uncertain. This fragility mirrors the NCR's bureaucratic weakness, but from the opposite direction. Mr. House represents a third approach to power. He rejects both democratic expansion and authoritarian conquest. Instead, he offers technocratic control, guided by long-term planning and automation. House believes that humanity cannot be trusted to govern itself responsibly, and that stability must be engineered rather than negotiated. House's power is highly centralized, but unlike Caesar's, it is not dependent on mass participation. His Securitron army allows him to enforce order without relying on human soldiers. This removes variables such as morale, dissent, and loyalty. His rule is efficient, predictable, and largely impersonal. However, House's system also lacks flexibility. His vision for the Mojave prioritizes stability over freedom. While life under House may be safer and more prosperous in the short term, it offers little opportunity for political participation or change. The future he proposes is carefully controlled, not collaboratively built. An independent Mojave represents the absence of centralized authority. This path emphasizes local autonomy, decentralized power, and self-determination. Rather than replacing one ruler with another, independence allows communities to govern themselves according to their own values. This approach avoids many of the pitfalls of large factions, but it also lacks cohesion. Without a unifying authority, the Mojave remains vulnerable to external threats and internal conflict. Independence offers freedom, but at the cost of security and coordination. Smaller factions further complicate the political landscape. Groups such as the Boomers, Great Khans, Brotherhood of Steel, Followers of the Apocalypse, and various local communities each have their own priorities and histories. These groups often align temporarily with larger factions, but rarely integrate fully. The Boomers, for example, isolate themselves at Nellis Air Force Base, valuing self-sufficiency and defensive power. Their isolation keeps them safe, but limits their influence. The Great Khans are shaped by a long history of displacement and conflict, making them wary of large governments. The Brotherhood of Steel in the Mojave is notably diminished compared to other regions. Their isolationism and refusal to adapt have reduced their influence. This portrayal reinforces the idea that rigid adherence to ideology can lead to decline. The Followers of the Apocalypse represent a non-militarized approach to recovery. They prioritize education, medical aid, and knowledge sharing. However, their lack of armed power leaves them dependent on the protection or tolerance of stronger factions. New Vegas's reputation system reflects this political complexity. Rather than judging actions on a moral scale, the game tracks how each faction perceives the player. This allows players to navigate alliances strategically or ideologically, depending on their goals. Faction relationships are not static. Actions taken in one area can affect standing elsewhere. Helping a small group may anger a larger one. Neutrality is difficult to maintain because power structures overlap. This interconnectedness reinforces the idea that the Mojave is a living political system. Decisions ripple outward rather than resolving neatly. There are consequences even when outcomes are not immediately visible. The game also avoids presenting a single, correct solution. Each major faction offers stability at a cost. The NCR sacrifices efficiency for ideals. The Legion sacrifices humanity for order. House sacrifices freedom for control. Independence sacrifices security for autonomy. This lack of moral certainty is intentional. New Vegas is not interested in providing easy answers. It presents governance as a series of trade-offs rather than a binary choice. Environmental storytelling supports this theme. NCR checkpoints are understaffed. Legion camps are rigid and severe. The Strip is orderly but exclusive. Each space reflects the values of those who control it. Dialogue further reinforces political nuance. Characters within factions often disagree with leadership, revealing internal conflict. Soldiers question orders. Civilians express mixed feelings about their rulers. No faction is monolithic. The courier's role in this system is deliberately ambiguous. The player is not a chosen leader by destiny, but an agent whose influence grows through action. This reinforces the idea that power is not inherent, but accumulated. The political struggle over Hoover Dam serves as a focal point because it is both symbolic and practical. Control of electricity and water determines the region's future. The dam represents the intersection of ideology and necessity. By tying political power to infrastructure, New Vegas grounds its conflict in material reality. Ideals matter, but resources decide outcomes. The game also emphasizes the long-term consequences of political decisions. Endings describe not just immediate results, but future conditions. This reinforces the idea that governance is an ongoing process, not a single victory. New Vegas's approach to factions reflects a broader Fallout theme, that rebuilding civilization is not simply about restoring old systems, but deciding which values are worth preserving. The Mojave is a testing ground for competing visions of the future. Each faction represents a different answer to the same question: how should humanity organize itself after collapse? By allowing the player to engage with these visions without prescribing a correct path, New Vegas invites reflection rather than judgment. The political balance of the Mojave is fragile by design. Stability is always temporary. Power shifts as alliances change. No outcome guarantees lasting peace. This instability mirrors real-world political systems, where progress is uneven and often contested. Fallout uses exaggeration and fiction to explore these dynamics without offering simple solutions. In the end, the factions of New Vegas are less about winning and more about choosing what kind of compromise one is willing to accept. The Mojave does not ask who should rule. It asks what ruling costs. And as the courier moves between banners, checkpoints, and quiet settlements, the wasteland reveals itself not as a battlefield between good and evil, but as a slow negotiation between survival, control, and the uncertain hope that something better might eventually emerge from the balance of power. Fallout New Vegas builds much of its identity around how the player interacts with the world on a mechanical level. While it shares its foundation with Fallout 3, many of its systems were adjusted, expanded, or rebalanced to support deeper role-playing and more deliberate decision-making. These gameplay mechanics are not simply tools for combat or progression. They are closely tied to how the Mojave functions as a living world. One of the most noticeable changes in New Vegas is how player skills influence interaction. Skills are not limited to passive bonuses or combat efficiency. They frequently appear in dialogue, quest solutions, and environmental interactions. This design choice reinforces the idea that character builds matter beyond combat. Speech, for example, is not a universal solution. High speech can persuade, negotiate, or deceive, but it does not always produce the best outcome. In some situations, other skills such as barter, science, medicine, or repair provide alternative dialogue options that reflect practical knowledge rather than charisma. This encourages players to think of their character as a specialist rather than a generalist. The inclusion of skill checks throughout dialogue reinforces role-playing identity. A character with high science approaches problems differently than one with high guns or survival. This creates subtle variations in how quests unfold, even when outcomes appear similar on the surface. Combat mechanics in New Vegas were also refined to support player agency. The introduction of iron sights allows for more precise aiming, making gunplay feel more deliberate and less dependent on the VATS system. While VATS remains important, it is no longer the sole focus of combat. Weapon condition and ammunition types further deepen combat strategy. Different ammo types allow players to tailor their approach to specific enemies. Armor-piercing rounds, hollow point rounds, and surplus ammunition each come with advantages and drawbacks. This system rewards preparation rather than reflex alone. The repair system encourages maintenance and resource management. Weapons degrade over time and must be repaired using similar items or specialized skills. This creates a steady demand for scavenging and planning, reinforcing the idea that the wasteland does not provide unlimited resources. Armor functions in a similar way. Damage Threshold replaces Fallout 3's damage resistance system, creating a clearer relationship between armor quality and survivability. Heavier armor absorbs more damage, but often at the cost of mobility. This trade-off reinforces deliberate equipment choices rather than simple upgrades. The hardcore mode, added at launch, further emphasizes survival mechanics. When enabled, ammunition has weight, healing items work gradually instead of instantly, and basic needs like food, water, and sleep must be managed. These mechanics slow the pace of the game and encourage careful planning. Hardcore mode is optional, but its existence reflects New Vegas's design philosophy. The game supports players who want a more immersive, methodical experience without forcing it on everyone. This flexibility mirrors the broader theme of choice. Companion mechanics are another area where New Vegas expands player interaction. Companions are not simply combat allies. Each has a personal history, preferences, and moral boundaries. Their approval or disapproval depends on player actions. Companion quests provide insight into the Mojave's history and social complexity. Through these stories, players learn about past conflicts, personal loss, and survival strategies. These quests are often quiet and reflective, rather than dramatic. The companion wheel allows for precise control over companion behavior, including positioning, aggression, and use of abilities. This system reinforces tactical decision-making and reduces randomness in encounters. Perks in New Vegas are more specialized than in Fallout 3. Rather than offering mostly numerical bonuses, many perks introduce new mechanics or dialogue options. Some perks unlock unique quest solutions, while others affect how factions perceive the player. This design makes perk selection more meaningful. Choosing a perk is not just about increasing efficiency, but about shaping how the character interacts with the world. Traits, introduced at the start of the game, further reinforce character identity. Traits provide both benefits and drawbacks, forcing players to accept trade-offs. This system discourages optimization without consequence. The reputation system integrates closely with gameplay mechanics. Actions taken during quests influence how factions treat the player, affecting prices, dialogue, and hostility. This system replaces the abstract karma model with a more situational approach. Reputation is not binary. Players can be liked by one group and hated by another, or maintain mixed standings. This complexity reflects the political reality of the Mojave and reinforces the idea that neutrality is difficult to sustain. Fast travel exists, but the game's structure encourages exploration between destinations. Many quests are discovered organically through travel, rather than direct assignment. This design rewards curiosity and attentiveness. Crafting systems in New Vegas support self-sufficiency. Players can create ammunition, healing items, and weapon modifications using scavenged materials. Crafting does not replace exploration, but complements it. Weapon mods allow players to customize firearms rather than replacing them entirely. This extends the lifespan of equipment and reinforces attachment to specific tools rather than constant upgrading. The casino mechanics on the Strip introduce a controlled form of risk and reward. Gambling provides a way to earn caps, but limits prevent exploitation. This reflects House's emphasis on order and regulation. Economics play a subtle but persistent role in gameplay. Caps are finite. Vendors have limited inventories, and prices fluctuate based on reputation and skills. This reinforces the idea that resources must be managed rather than accumulated endlessly. Quest design in New Vegas often supports multiple solutions. Violence is rarely the only option. Dialogue, stealth, sabotage, and negotiation are all viable approaches in many situations. Importantly, the game tracks long-term consequences. A solution that resolves a problem immediately may create complications later. This encourages players to think beyond short-term gains. Failure is also integrated into gameplay. Not all quests can be resolved perfectly. Some outcomes involve loss, compromise, or unintended consequences. This reinforces realism and thematic consistency. The absence of level scaling in certain areas creates meaningful danger. Some regions are simply too dangerous early on. This encourages players to respect the world's logic rather than assuming all challenges are equally manageable. User interface design supports clarity over spectacle. Information is presented plainly, reinforcing function rather than immersion-breaking visuals. This restraint aligns with the game's grounded tone. The Pip-Boy remains central to gameplay organization. Its design emphasizes practicality, with clear categorization of items, quests, and data. The Pip-Boy is not just a menu, but a representation of how information is accessed in the wasteland. Time progression affects certain quests and encounters. Waiting too long or advancing too quickly can alter outcomes. This reinforces the idea that the world continues to move regardless of player presence. New Vegas's mechanics consistently support its narrative goals. Systems are not isolated features, but interconnected parts of a larger design philosophy focused on choice, consequence, and identity. The game does not rush the player. It allows for long stretches of travel, conversation, and observation. This pacing supports reflection rather than constant action. By integrating mechanics with narrative and world design, New Vegas creates a cohesive experience. The way the game plays reinforces what it is about. Every skill check, reputation change, and mechanical limitation contributes to the same underlying message that survival in the Mojave depends not on power alone, but on understanding systems, relationships, and consequences. In this way, gameplay itself becomes a form of storytelling. The player does not just witness the Mojave's struggles, they participate in them through every decision, every preparation, and every compromise. And as hours pass quietly in the desert, the mechanics fade into routine, leaving behind a steady rhythm of choice and consequence that defines Fallout New Vegas not as a test of reflexes, but as a slow, thoughtful exercise in living within a complex and imperfect world. Fallout New Vegas places extraordinary emphasis on how quests are structured and how stories unfold over time. Rather than relying on a single linear narrative supported by optional side content, the game builds its experience around a web of interconnected quests that reflect the political, social, and personal dynamics of the Mojave. This approach allows the player to encounter the world not as a sequence of missions, but as a collection of situations shaped by history and choice. At a fundamental level, quests in New Vegas are designed to be flexible. Many objectives can be completed in multiple ways, often without explicit instruction from the game. Dialogue, environment, and character behavior provide information that allows players to infer solutions rather than being directed toward them. This design encourages observation and engagement rather than checklist completion. The main quest itself is structured around a simple premise. A courier survives an assassination attempt and seeks to recover a stolen item. This understated beginning avoids urgency and spectacle, allowing the player to explore the Mojave at their own pace. The central conflict emerges gradually, revealed through interactions with factions and locations rather than dramatic cutscenes. This slow reveal is intentional. By the time the player fully understands the significance of the Platinum Chip and Hoover Dam, they have already formed relationships, reputations, and opinions. The main quest does not impose meaning, it accumulates it. Side quests in New Vegas are treated with the same narrative care as the main storyline. Many are deeply connected to faction dynamics or local histories. Completing a side quest can alter political alignments, unlock new paths, or close off future opportunities. As a result, side content feels integral rather than optional. One defining feature of New Vegas's quest design is its respect for player intelligence. Information is rarely repeated unnecessarily. NPCs speak plainly and often assume the player is capable of understanding context. This creates a quieter, more grounded storytelling style. Dialogue-driven storytelling is central to this approach. Conversations are often long, detailed, and information-rich. Characters discuss logistics, history, and personal motivations without dramatic embellishment. This tone reinforces the idea that the Mojave's conflicts are practical rather than mythical. Skill checks appear frequently in dialogue, offering alternative ways to resolve situations. These checks are not guaranteed successes. Failing or choosing not to use them can lead to different outcomes rather than outright failure. This reinforces the idea that every choice carries weight. The game also allows players to complete quests in unintended ways. Killing an important character does not always break the quest line. Instead, the game adapts, offering alternative resolutions or acknowledging the loss. This flexibility reinforces the sense that the world responds to player actions rather than forcing a predetermined outcome. Consequences in New Vegas are often delayed. A decision made early in the game may not have visible effects until much later. This design choice encourages reflection and reinforces realism. In real political systems, outcomes are rarely immediate or obvious. The ending slides exemplify this philosophy. Rather than presenting a single cinematic conclusion, the game provides narrated summaries describing the long-term effects of the player's choices. These summaries reflect not just the main quest outcome, but the state of numerous factions and communities. This structure emphasizes that no decision exists in isolation. Helping one group may harm another. Choosing stability may suppress autonomy. The game does not judge these outcomes explicitly, leaving interpretation to the player. New Vegas also avoids clear moral framing. Quests rarely present choices as purely good or evil. Instead, they involve trade-offs between competing values such as order, freedom, survival, and justice. This ambiguity reflects the game's broader thematic focus on governance and compromise. Many quests explore the consequences of past decisions rather than immediate problems. Characters live with the results of earlier conflicts, policies, or betrayals. The player often arrives after the damage is done, able only to mitigate or redirect outcomes rather than erase them. This temporal layering gives the Mojave a sense of depth. The world feels shaped by events that occurred long before the player's arrival. Quests become windows into these histories rather than isolated scenarios. Faction-related quests further reinforce this complexity. Each major faction offers a series of tasks that reveal its internal structure, weaknesses, and contradictions. Through these quests, players learn not just what a faction claims to represent, but how it actually operates. The NCR's quests often involve bureaucracy, supply shortages, and conflicting orders. These tasks reveal the challenges of maintaining a large organization in a hostile environment. Even well-intentioned actions can become mired in inefficiency. Legion quests emphasize discipline, hierarchy, and brutality. They reveal a system that values order above all else, often at the expense of individual lives. These quests challenge players to confront the cost of stability enforced through violence. Mr. House's quests focus on control, infrastructure, and long-term planning. They often involve removing unpredictability rather than solving immediate human problems. This reflects House's prioritization of systems over sentiment. Independent paths highlight the difficulty of operating without centralized authority. Quests along this route often involve mediating disputes, balancing interests, and preventing chaos rather than imposing solutions. Smaller faction quests add nuance to the larger conflict. Groups like the Boomers, Great Khans, and Followers of the Apocalypse present localized perspectives. Their stories often involve survival, memory, and adaptation rather than power. The game also uses environmental quests, objectives discovered through exploration rather than dialogue. Finding a location, reading a terminal, or observing an interaction can trigger new objectives or reveal hidden narratives. This approach rewards curiosity and attentiveness. Failure is treated as a valid outcome. Some quests cannot be resolved perfectly. Innocent characters may suffer. Resources may be lost. These outcomes are acknowledged rather than erased, reinforcing realism. Quest pacing in New Vegas is deliberately uneven. Some quests are resolved quickly, while others unfold over long periods. This variation prevents the experience from feeling mechanical or predictable. The game's narrative structure avoids centralizing the player as the sole agent of change. While the courier is influential, they are not omnipotent. Some events proceed regardless of player involvement. This reinforces the sense that the world exists independently. New Vegas also avoids excessive exposition. Important information is often optional, embedded in dialogue or environmental details. Players who listen carefully gain a deeper understanding, while others can proceed without full context. This layered storytelling supports replayability. Different choices, skills, and alignments reveal new perspectives on familiar quests. The same situation can feel entirely different depending on the player's approach. The absence of a definitive best ending further reinforces this design philosophy. Each outcome carries benefits and costs. Stability may come at the expense of freedom. Independence may lead to uncertainty. Order may require sacrifice. By refusing to resolve these tensions neatly, New Vegas respects the complexity of political decision-making. It presents governance as an ongoing process rather than a solved problem. The cumulative effect of this quest design is a sense of quiet weight. Choices matter not because the game declares them important, but because the world reacts in believable ways. The player becomes part of the Mojave's ongoing story rather than its conclusion. The wasteland continues to exist beyond the final decision. This approach aligns with the game's slower pacing. There is time to think, to reconsider, and to live with outcomes. The narrative does not rush toward resolution. In New Vegas, quests are not isolated challenges to be completed and forgotten. They are conversations with the world, shaping and reshaping relationships over time. The result is a narrative experience that feels lived in rather than performed. The Mojave does not revolve around the player, but it remembers them. And as each quest concludes quietly, often without spectacle, the player is left not with a sense of triumph, but with the steady understanding that every choice has nudged the balance of the wasteland just slightly in one direction or another, leaving the future open, uncertain, and shaped by decisions made along long roads under an endless desert sky. Fallout New Vegas distinguishes itself not only through its factions and systems, but through the way ordinary people inhabit the Mojave wasteland. While the game is remembered for its political complexity and branching narratives, much of its atmosphere is created by quieter interactions. Conversations at roadside inns, casual remarks from travelers, and the routines of people simply trying to live another day. These details give the Mojave a sense of continuity and realism that extends beyond major plot lines. Characters in New Vegas are written to feel grounded rather than heroic. Most NPCs are not leaders or legends. They are soldiers tired of long deployments, merchants balancing risk and profit, settlers struggling with limited resources, and drifters navigating uncertain futures. Their dialogue reflects this focus on practicality over drama. Many conversations in New Vegas begin with mundane concerns. NPCs talk about supply shortages, broken equipment, pay disputes, and local rumors. These topics may seem unremarkable, but they establish a baseline reality for the Mojave. Life is not defined by constant crisis, but by ongoing maintenance. This approach makes the world feel inhabited even when the player is not directly involved. People have opinions, habits, and routines that exist independently of the courier's presence. The player enters ongoing lives rather than triggering scripted moments. Dialogue in New Vegas is often understated. Characters rarely deliver long emotional monologues unless the context demands it. Instead, they speak plainly, often with dry humor or resignation. This tone reflects a society accustomed to hardship and limited expectations. Accents and speech patterns vary across the Mojave, subtly reinforcing regional identity. NCR soldiers use bureaucratic language and military jargon. Legion characters speak formally, emphasizing discipline and hierarchy. Independent settlers use colloquial language shaped by isolation and necessity. The game's writing avoids excessive exposition. Characters rarely explain the world in abstract terms. Instead, information is conveyed through anecdotes, complaints, and personal observations. This indirect storytelling rewards attentive listening. Companion characters provide a deeper look into Mojave life. Each companion represents a different background and perspective, shaped by the wasteland. Their personal quests explore themes such as loss, loyalty, disillusionment, and adaptation. Boone's dialogue reflects trauma and guilt, shaped by his experiences as an NCR sniper. Veronica's conversations explore tension between tradition and change within the Brotherhood of Steel. Cass's outlook is shaped by economic hardship and distrust of large institutions. These companions are not idealized. They express frustration, doubt, and sometimes cynicism. Their development unfolds gradually through dialogue rather than dramatic turning points. Companions also react to the world around them. They comment on locations, factions, and decisions made by the player. These reactions reinforce the sense that events have meaning beyond mechanical outcomes. Even minor NPCs are given distinct identities. Shopkeepers remember repeat customers. Caravan guards discuss recent dangers on trade routes. Doctors talk about the limitations of their supplies. These small touches create consistency. Everyday life in the Mojave revolves around scarcity and routine. Water sources determine settlement placement. Food is simple and often repetitive. Entertainment is limited, making places like casinos and bars significant social hubs. The New Vegas Strip functions as an anomaly in this landscape. Its controlled luxury contrasts sharply with the surrounding wasteland. Dialogue on the Strip often reflects this tension, with characters acknowledging the artificial nature of its stability. Outside the Strip, roadside establishments like the Dino Delight Motel or the Mojave Outpost Bar serve as gathering points. Conversations in these spaces often involve gossip, trade information, or reflections on the shifting balance of power. Radio broadcasts contribute to the sense of daily life. Mr. New Vegas delivers calm, neutral commentary that contrasts with the harsh realities outside. His tone reinforces the illusion of continuity and order, even when events suggest otherwise. The music played on the radio adds to this atmosphere. Songs about love, loss, and nostalgia play while characters go about routine tasks. This juxtaposition creates a sense of emotional distance rather than irony. Work defines much of Mojave life. NCR soldiers patrol endlessly. Farmers tend crops adapted to poor soil. Mechanics salvage and repair old machines. Dialogue often references labor as a constant necessity rather than a path to advancement. Education appears limited. Most characters learn through experience rather than formal instruction. Knowledge is practical and situational. This shapes dialogue, which emphasizes what works rather than why it works. Memory plays an important role in character interactions. Older characters remember pre-war stories passed down through generations. Younger characters know the world only as it is. These differences shape attitudes toward progress and authority. The Mojave's social structure is informal. While factions impose hierarchy, everyday interactions are often based on mutual need rather than status. Respect is earned through reliability rather than rank. Humor appears frequently, but it is often dry or understated. Characters joke about danger, inconvenience, and uncertainty as coping mechanisms. This humor feels organic rather than performative. Silence is also important. Not every NPC has something to say. Some stand quietly, watching the road or tending to tasks. These moments of non-interaction reinforce realism. The absence of constant dialogue allows ambient sounds to fill the space. Wind, distant gunfire, and machinery become part of everyday life. The world feels active even when no one is speaking. New Vegas also includes characters who are disengaged or apathetic. Some NPCs express indifference toward major conflicts, believing they have little control over outcomes. This perspective adds nuance to the game's political narrative. Not everyone wants change. Some characters prefer stability, even if it is imperfect. Their dialogue reflects fatigue rather than idealism. Cultural identity in the Mojave is fragmented. There is no unified sense of belonging. People identify with settlements, factions, or personal histories rather than a shared nation. Dialogue often reflects this localized loyalty. This fragmentation affects trust. Characters are cautious with information and reluctant to rely on strangers. Gaining trust requires time and consistent behavior. The courier's role in these interactions is deliberately understated. The player is not treated as inherently special. Respect must be earned through actions rather than assumed. Dialogue options often reflect tone rather than outcome. The same information can be delivered politely, neutrally, or aggressively. These choices influence how characters perceive the courier without always altering quest results. This subtlety reinforces immersion. Conversations feel like real exchanges rather than mechanical puzzles. New Vegas avoids exaggerating personality traits. Characters are not defined by single quirks. They exhibit contradictions and mixed motivations, reflecting real human behavior. The game also includes characters who embody stagnation. Some are stuck in routines they cannot escape. Their dialogue reflects resignation rather than hope. This contrast between those who adapt and those who stagnate reinforces one of the game's central themes. Survival does not guarantee progress. Moments of kindness exist, but they are often quiet. Helping a stranger may result in a brief acknowledgement rather than grand reward. These interactions feel authentic rather than transactional. Conflict between characters is often understated. Disagreements emerge through tone and implication rather than overt hostility. This restraint makes tension feel more realistic. Over time, repeated interactions create familiarity. Returning to a settlement after significant events reveals changes in dialogue and behavior. This continuity reinforces the passage of time. The Mojave feels lived in because its people respond to events incrementally. Change is slow, uneven, and often subtle. New Vegas's character writing avoids moral instruction. NPCs do not tell the player what to think. They present perspectives shaped by experience, leaving interpretation open. This openness encourages reflection rather than judgment. The player is invited to listen, consider, and decide rather than react immediately. Everyday life in the Mojave is not dramatic. It is repetitive, uncertain, and occasionally interrupted by violence. This rhythm mirrors real survival rather than cinematic storytelling. The game's emphasis on ordinary conversations grounds its larger themes. Political struggles matter because they affect daily routines, access to resources, and personal safety. By focusing on characters as people rather than symbols, New Vegas creates emotional depth without sentimentality. The Mojave is not defined solely by its leaders or conflicts. It is defined by the accumulation of small interactions, quiet routines, and personal stories unfolding between larger events. And as the courier moves through this world, listening more than speaking, the Mojave reveals itself not as a stage for heroism, but as a place where people live carefully, speak plainly, and continue forward, one conversation, one shift, and one ordinary day at a time. Fallout New Vegas places a strong emphasis on physical locations as anchors for memory, storytelling, and progression. While many role-playing games rely on dramatic set pieces or constant encounters to maintain momentum, New Vegas allows locations to speak for themselves. Towns, ruins, highways, and landmarks are arranged to encourage slow exploration rather than rapid consumption, making the act of moving through the Mojave feel deliberate and grounded. Many locations in the Mojave are introduced long before they are reached. The New Vegas Strip, Hoover Dam, and Repcon Test Site are visible from afar, creating anticipation through distance rather than sudden revelation. This approach reinforces scale and gives players time to contextualize where they are going in relation to where they have been. Settlements tend to be small and functional. Places like Goodsprings, Novak, and Sloan exist because they serve a purpose, not because they are designed to impress. Their layouts are simple, often built around a single industry, landmark, or resource. This practicality reflects how post-war communities form around necessity rather than aspiration. Goodsprings is structured around survival basics: water, shelter, and defense. Its buildings are modest, its population small, and its concerns local. The town introduces the idea that most of the Mojave operates on a human scale, where individual actions can have noticeable effects. Novak is centered around a pre-war roadside attraction, repurposed as a lookout. The dinosaur itself serves as both a visual landmark and a functional defensive structure. This reuse of old-world objects is common throughout the Mojave and reinforces the theme of adaptation rather than rebuilding. Industrial locations are equally restrained. Sloan exists solely to support quarry operations. Its proximity to danger highlights how economic necessity often outweighs safety. The town does not expand or diversify because it does not need to. It exists to serve a single role. Military and infrastructural landmarks are treated with a sense of weight rather than spectacle. Hoover Dam is massive, but it is also quiet. Much of its significance comes from what it represents, rather than what happens there, moment to moment. The dam's presence looms over the Mojave as a constant reminder of contested resources. The Mojave Outpost serves as a transitional space between regions. Its design emphasizes movement, paperwork, and waiting. Dialogue here reinforces the slow pace of bureaucratic expansion and the strain of maintaining control over distant territory. Vaults in New Vegas are fewer and more subdued compared to other Fallout titles. When they appear, they often function as contained stories rather than sprawling dungeons. Their designs emphasize confinement, repetition, and long-term consequences rather than immediate danger. Vault 22, for example, is overgrown and quiet, with danger revealed gradually rather than immediately. The environment tells its story through atmosphere and layout rather than exposition. Exploration becomes an act of discovery rather than confrontation. Roadside locations play a significant role in shaping the Mojave's rhythm. Highway rest stops, motels, and gas stations appear frequently, reinforcing the idea that travel is central to the region's identity. These places often feel temporary, as if people pass through rather than settle permanently. The long stretches of road between locations are intentionally sparse. Encounters are spaced out, allowing for extended periods of travel without interruption. This pacing encourages reflection and reinforces the sense of distance. Natural landmarks, such as cliffs, ridges, and dried lake beds, provide orientation and visual variety. These features are not merely decorative. They influence movement, visibility, and encounter design. Elevated terrain offers safety and perspective, while open plains expose travelers to danger. Hidden locations reward curiosity rather than completionism. Many unmarked areas contain small stories, environmental clues, or minor rewards. These discoveries are optional and easily missed, reinforcing the idea that the Mojave does not reveal everything at once. Caves and remote structures often feel abandoned rather than hostile. They suggest past use without demanding interaction. This quiet emptiness adds to the sense that the world has moved on. The New Vegas Strip stands apart from the rest of the Mojave in both design and tone. Its clean streets, controlled access, and neon lighting create a stark contrast with the surrounding desert. This contrast reinforces the artificial nature of its stability. Each casino on the Strip has a distinct layout and atmosphere. These differences reflect their management styles and philosophies rather than mere aesthetics. The interiors are designed to feel enclosed and controlled, emphasizing separation from the outside world. Freeside, located just beyond the Strip's gates, serves as a buffer zone. Its crowded streets and improvised structures highlight the disparity between wealth and poverty. Movement through Freeside feels constrained compared to the open desert, reinforcing social tension. Ruined urban areas are limited in New Vegas, but when they appear, they are used carefully. Rather than overwhelming the player with dense ruins, the game uses smaller clusters of buildings to suggest decay without clutter. Military ruins often feel orderly even in destruction. Barracks, outposts, and training facilities retain their structure, implying that discipline outlasted the war itself. These locations often contain records or equipment that hint at pre-war priorities. Radio towers, billboards, and signage provide navigation cues. These elements ground the Mojave in recognizable infrastructure, reinforcing continuity with the pre-war world without dominating it. The game's lighting supports exploration rather than tension. Daylight is clear and bright, making navigation straightforward. Nighttime is darker but rarely pitch black, allowing travel without constant fear. Interior lighting is functional rather than dramatic. Rooms are lit enough to reveal layout and objects without emphasizing horror. This restraint keeps exploration calm and methodical. Sound design enhances this quiet exploration. Footsteps, wind, and distant sounds fill the absence of music during travel. This ambient audio reinforces presence rather than urgency. Many locations change subtly over time. Faction control shifts, NPCs move, and dialogue updates reflect recent events. These changes are often understated, rewarding return visits. Fast travel exists, but the world is designed to be experienced between destinations. Traveling on foot reveals scale and context that fast travel bypasses. The Mojave's layout encourages players to form mental maps. Familiar routes become routines, landmarks become reference points. This familiarity fosters attachment to the region. Exploration is rarely mandatory. Players can follow main roads and still progress. Those who venture off path do so by choice rather than obligation. This optional exploration aligns with the game's overall philosophy. New Vegas does not demand completion. It offers depth for those who seek it. The absence of excessive visual clutter allows players to notice small details. A single abandoned camp can suggest a story without explanation. These moments rely on imagination rather than instruction. Environmental storytelling often avoids resolution. Questions are raised without answers. Who lived here? Why did they leave? These mysteries remain unresolved. This lack of closure reinforces realism. Not every story ends neatly. Some simply fade. The Mojave feels vast not because it is filled with content, but because it is filled with space. Space for travel, thought, and silence. This design supports a slower experience. Exploration becomes routine rather than event-driven. The world is something to inhabit rather than conquer. Locations are not designed to impress immediately. Their significance accumulates over time through repeated visits and contextual understanding. By the time a player recognizes a place as important, they have often already passed through it multiple times. Familiarity replaces novelty. This approach makes the Mojave feel lived in rather than curated. It exists independently of player attention. In New Vegas, locations are not checkpoints or objectives. They are parts of a larger landscape that continues whether or not the player engages. The act of moving through this landscape becomes a form of participation. Walking long roads, passing familiar signs, and stopping briefly at known landmarks creates rhythm. This rhythm is central to the game's atmosphere. It encourages patience and attentiveness rather than urgency. Through its careful placement of locations and landmarks, New Vegas creates a world that invites quiet exploration. The Mojave does not demand to be seen all at once. It waits. And as the courier moves steadily across the desert, guided by distant lights and familiar silhouettes, the Mojave reveals itself not through spectacle, but through repetition, memory, and the slow accumulation of places that begin to feel known not because they are remarkable, but because they are simply there, enduring under the open sky. The economy of Fallout New Vegas is not defined by abundance or rapid growth, but by careful movement, negotiation, and restraint. Caps change hands slowly, supplies are limited, and trade routes exist only because people continuously risk travel across hostile terrain. This economic structure reinforces the game's quieter tone and its focus on long-term survival rather than sudden prosperity. Trade in the Mojave depends heavily on geography. Roads, passes, and choke points determine where goods can move and where they cannot. Settlements that sit along major routes naturally become hubs, while those isolated from traffic remain small and vulnerable. This relationship between location and prosperity is consistent throughout the region. Caravans form the backbone of Mojave trade. Groups like the Crimson Caravan and the Gunrunners transport weapons, food, and manufactured goods between settlements. Their routes are not arbitrary. They follow relatively safe paths where infrastructure still exists and where factions tolerate their presence. Caravan dialogue often emphasizes risk. Guards discuss ambushes, supply shortages, and changing political conditions. This reinforces the idea that trade is never guaranteed. Every successful delivery represents planning, negotiation, and luck rather than routine. The presence of caravan guards highlights how closely commerce and violence are linked. Trade requires protection. Without armed escorts, caravans would not survive. This necessity ties economic activity directly to faction power and regional stability. The NCR plays a significant role in supporting trade, even when unintentionally. Its military presence along roads provides a measure of security that benefits merchants. However, this protection is inconsistent. Troops are stretched thin, and many routes remain dangerous despite official patrols. This inconsistency creates economic imbalance. Some settlements thrive under protection, while others struggle due to isolation. Prosperity becomes uneven, reinforcing regional disparities. Caps function as the primary currency in the Mojave, but their value is contextual. Prices fluctuate based on reputation, location, and supply. Merchants do not have unlimited inventory or funds. This limits exploitation and reinforces realism. Barter skill influences prices, but it does not eliminate scarcity. Even skilled negotiators must work within the constraints of available goods. This ensures that economic interactions remain grounded. Food production in the Mojave is limited and specialized. Crops are adapted to poor soil and harsh conditions. Brahmin ranches supply meat and hides, but herds are not large. Agriculture supports survival, not abundance. Water is one of the most valuable resources in the region. Control of water sources directly affects settlement viability. Wells, springs, and infrastructure, like Hoover Dam, determine where people can live and trade. Hoover Dam's importance extends beyond electricity. Its control of water flow affects irrigation and population growth. This makes it a central economic asset as well as a political one. The Strip operates under a separate economic logic. Casinos generate caps through controlled gambling rather than production. This artificial economy depends on constant inflow from the surrounding wasteland. Without travelers and traders, the Strip's prosperity would collapse. House's regulation of gambling reflects his desire for stability. Casinos are allowed to profit, but within strict limits. This prevents economic disruption while maintaining the illusion of freedom and luxury. Freeside exists in contrast to the Strip's controlled wealth. Its economy is informal, relying on scavenging, small-scale trade, and charity. The disparity between these adjacent areas highlights how economic systems can diverge within short distances. Weapon manufacturing is limited but significant. The gunrunners represent one of the few groups producing new equipment rather than scavenging exclusively. Their factory demonstrates that industrial activity, while rare, is not impossible. However, this production remains specialized. Weapons are manufactured because demand is constant. Other industries do not receive the same investment because their returns are uncertain. Repair and maintenance form another important economic layer. Mechanics, doctors, and technicians keep existing systems running. Their work does not create new wealth, but prevents loss. This maintenance-focused economy reinforces stagnation. Scavenging remains essential. Old world ruins supply materials that cannot be produced locally. This creates a cycle where progress depends on the remains of the past. Crafting systems reflect this reality. Ammunition, food, and tools are assembled from salvaged components. This self-sufficiency reduces reliance on trade but does not eliminate it. Faction policies influence economic outcomes. The NCR attempts taxation and regulation, which constrain local economies but provide structure. The Legion extracts resources through force, eliminating markets in favor of direct control. Independent settlements must navigate these pressures carefully. Aligning with a faction can bring protection and trade access, but at the cost of autonomy. Smaller groups like the Followers of the Apocalypse operate outside traditional markets. They provide services freely or at low cost, prioritizing aid over profit. This alternative economic model highlights the possibility of cooperation without accumulation. However, the followers' lack of resources limits their reach. Good intentions alone cannot sustain large-scale recovery. Black markets exist quietly. Smuggling, theft, and unauthorized trade occur where regulation or scarcity creates opportunity. These activities are rarely emphasized, but they contribute to the region's economic texture. Economic information spreads slowly. Prices vary between locations because communication is limited. Traders rely on experience rather than data. This creates inefficiency but also opportunity. The player's role in this economy is modest. While the courier can accumulate wealth, their actions rarely transform the economic system as a whole. Individual success does not equate to regional prosperity. This limitation reinforces the game's grounded tone. One person cannot rebuild an economy alone. Change requires coordination and time. Caps themselves symbolize continuity with the past. Their value persists because people agree on it, not because of inherent worth. This shared agreement reflects social stability more than material abundance. The Mojave's economy also reflects memory. People remember which routes were safe, which traders were reliable, and which factions honored agreements. Reputation influences economic interaction as much as skill. Long-term contracts and partnerships are rare. Trust is fragile. Most trade occurs on a transactional basis, reinforcing caution. Economic growth is slow because risk is high. Investment requires confidence in future stability, which remains uncertain. As a result, most economic activity focuses on immediate needs. This short-term focus limits innovation. New ideas struggle to gain traction when survival is uncertain. This reinforces reliance on existing systems. The absence of large-scale manufacturing prevents economic acceleration. Without factories, supply chains remain shallow. Goods move slowly and in small quantities. Transportation technology is limited. Vehicles exist as relics rather than tools. Movement depends on animals and walking. This constrains trade volume and speed. Despite these limitations, the Mojave economy persists. Trade continues because people need it. Systems adapt rather than collapse. This persistence is quiet rather than dramatic. Markets open daily. Caravans depart regularly. Goods change hands incrementally. Economic life in New Vegas is not about growth, curves, or expansion. It is about balance. Enough supply to survive, enough movement to connect communities, enough structure to prevent chaos. The economy mirrors the game's broader themes. Progress is possible, but slow. Stability exists, but requires constant effort. The Mojave does not experience economic miracles. It experiences endurance. And as caps pass from hand to hand, supplies move cautiously across the desert, and markets open each morning with modest expectations. The economy of New Vegas reveals itself not as a system racing toward recovery, but as one settling into a careful rhythm sustained not by abundance or ambition, but by patience, negotiation, and the steady, unremarkable work of keeping things going just long enough to matter. Combat in Fallout New Vegas is ever present, but it is rarely glamorous. Unlike games that frame violence as spectacle or constant escalation, New Vegas treats combat as a practical reality of life in the Mojave. It is something most people want to avoid, something that carries cost, preparation, and consequence. This grounded treatment of violence reinforces the game's broader themes of restraint, scarcity, and survival. Weapons in the Mojave are tools first and symbols second. Guns are not rare, but ammunition often is. Most firearms show signs of wear, modification, and reuse. This reflects a world where production is limited and maintenance matters more than novelty. A reliable weapon is valued not because it is powerful, but because it still works. The diversity of weapons in New Vegas reflects the region's fragmented history. Pre-war firearms, improvised weapons, military-grade rifles, and energy weapons all coexist. This mixture suggests that no single system replaced the old world entirely. Instead, pieces of different eras remain in circulation. Ballistic weapons dominate the Mojave. Pistols, rifles, and shotguns are common because they are easier to maintain and repair. Energy weapons exist, but they are rarer and often restricted to specific factions or locations. This distribution reinforces the idea that advanced technology is difficult to sustain. Ammunition scarcity shapes combat behavior. Players are encouraged to conserve resources rather than engage every threat. This makes avoidance, negotiation, and stealth viable alternatives to direct confrontation. The inclusion of different ammunition types adds further complexity. Armor-piercing rounds, hollow points, and surplus ammunition each affect combat outcomes differently. This system rewards preparation and situational awareness rather than raw damage output. Weapon condition reinforces this approach. Firearms degrade with use, requiring repair or replacement. This prevents reliance on a single tool indefinitely and encourages adaptability. Combat becomes a series of calculated decisions rather than a test of endurance. Melee weapons and unarmed combat occupy an important niche. Knives, clubs, and fists are practical in close quarters and do not require ammunition. These options reflect the Mojave's emphasis on resourcefulness. Unarmed combat, in particular, is treated with seriousness. Perks and techniques allow skilled characters to disable or control opponents without firearms. This expands the definition of combat beyond shooting. Energy weapons introduce a different dynamic. Laser and plasma weapons are powerful, but often expensive to maintain. Their presence highlights technological disparity between factions. The Brotherhood of Steel and certain Enclave remnants possess capabilities others cannot replicate. Explosives add risk to combat. Grenades and mines can shift encounters quickly, but misuse is dangerous. Their limited availability encourages restraint rather than frequent use. Enemy behavior reinforces the grounded tone. Raiders are disorganized but dangerous in groups. Legion soldiers fight with discipline and coordination. NCR troops rely on numbers and positioning. Wildlife behaves according to instinct rather than strategy. These differences make combat encounters feel contextual rather than generic. Fighting one group does not feel the same as fighting another. Preparation matters. The VAT system remains available, but is less dominant than in Fallout 3. Real-time combat with iron sights is more effective, encouraging deliberate aiming and positioning. This shifts combat from abstraction to engagement. Armor plays a significant role in survivability. Damage. Threshold ensures that armor quality directly affects incoming damage. This system emphasizes defensive preparation and reinforces the importance of equipment choice. Heavy armor provides protection but limits mobility. Light armor offers flexibility but less defense. These trade-offs reflect realistic considerations rather than linear progression. Companions influence combat rhythm. They provide support but require management. Poor positioning or equipment can lead to their injury or death, reinforcing responsibility. Hardcore mode amplifies combat consequences. Healing is slower, injuries matter more, and resource management becomes critical. This mode emphasizes caution over aggression. The game does not encourage constant combat. Many encounters can be avoided through careful movement, dialogue, or alternate routes. This reinforces the idea that survival does not require domination. Violence often escalates situations rather than resolving them. Killing members of a faction can trigger retaliation or long-term hostility. Combat decisions ripple outward beyond the immediate encounter. Faction conflicts frame much of the Mojave's violence. Skirmishes are often part of larger power struggles rather than isolated events. Combat becomes a symptom of political tension. The game also depicts violence as routine. NCR soldiers patrol constantly. Legion forces execute regularly. Raiders ambush opportunistically. This normalization reinforces the wasteland's harsh reality. Despite this, combat is rarely presented as heroic. Victories are quiet, bodies remain. Loot is utilitarian. There are no triumphant fanfares. Environmental storytelling reinforces this tone. Battlefields are littered with remains and abandoned equipment. These spaces suggest past violence without dramatization. The Mojave's openness affects combat pacing. Long sightlines encourage cautious engagement. Ambushes require planning. Cover is meaningful. Indoor combat contrasts sharply with outdoor encounters. Confined spaces increase tension and limit movement. These shifts prevent combat from becoming monotonous. Stealth plays a significant role. Avoiding detection conserves resources and reduces risk. The game rewards patience and awareness. Skill investment influences combat options. Science, repair, and medicine provide indirect advantages by improving equipment and recovery. Combat effectiveness is not limited to combat skills alone. Perks further specialize combat approaches. Some enhance specific weapon types. Others introduce tactical options such as disarming or critical strikes. These perks reflect long-term planning rather than immediate power. Enemy scaling is limited. Dangerous areas remain dangerous regardless of player level. This reinforces respect for the world's logic. Death is consequential. Save systems allow recovery, but repeated failure encourages reconsideration rather than brute force. Combat music is understated. It signals danger without overwhelming atmosphere. Silence returns quickly after encounters, reinforcing calm rather than excitement. The aftermath of combat is often uneventful. Looting is methodical. Injuries are addressed. Travel resumes. This routine reinforces realism. Violence is one tool among many. It is effective in some contexts and counterproductive in others. This balance supports role-playing variety. The Mojave does not reward aggression indiscriminately. Thoughtful engagement yields better outcomes than reckless action. This approach reflects the game's broader philosophy. Power must be used carefully. Force solves immediate problems, but creates new ones. Combat design reinforces this message mechanically. Every shot fired has a cost. Every fight risks escalation. Over time, Players learn to evaluate situations rather than rush into them. Combat becomes a last resort rather than a default response. This learning curve supports immersion. The courier adapts to the Mojave's realities just as its inhabitants have. Violence becomes normalized but never trivialized. It is part of daily life but never celebrated. The Mojave's quiet stretches between encounters reinforce this perspective. Long walks through empty desert contrast with sudden violence, highlighting its intrusion rather than dominance. This rhythm prevents combat fatigue. Encounters remain meaningful rather than repetitive. The game also allows non-lethal outcomes. Stuns, disarming, and avoidance offer alternatives. These options reinforce moral and practical choice. In the end, combat in New Vegas is not about mastery, but about management. It is a system designed to integrate with survival rather than overshadow it. Weapons are tools, armor is protection, violence is a condition, not a goal. And as the courier moves through the Mojave, choosing when to fight and when to walk away, combat becomes just another part of the wasteland's steady rhythm present, unavoidable, but never louder than the long silence that follows once the dust settles and the desert returns to stillness. Fallout New Vegas is often remembered for its writing, factions, and choice-driven narrative, but much of its identity comes from elements that operate quietly in the background. Atmosphere, music, pacing, and the passage of time work together to create a sense of stillness that defines the Mojave experience. These elements do not demand attention, yet they shape how the player feels moment to moment, especially during long stretches of travel and reflection. The Mojave is a world that rarely rushes the player. Unlike games that rely on constant stimulus, New Vegas allows time to pass slowly. Long walks across open terrain are common, and these journeys are often uninterrupted. This pacing encourages observation rather than reaction. Time in New Vegas feels extended rather than compressed. Day and night cycles move at a steady rate, and the world changes subtly with them. Morning light brings clarity and distance. Afternoon heat emphasizes exposure. Night introduces quiet isolation rather than constant danger. The absence of dynamic weather reinforces this consistency. There are no sudden storms or dramatic shifts. The environment remains predictable, reinforcing a sense of long-term equilibrium. The world feels settled, even if unstable. Lighting plays a crucial role in atmosphere. Natural daylight dominates most of the Mojave, casting soft shadows and emphasizing wide open space. Interiors are lit functionally rather than theatrically. This restraint avoids overstimulation. Neon lighting on the strip contrasts sharply with the desert's natural palette. The artificial glow feels deliberate and contained. It draws attention without overwhelming the senses. This contrast reinforces the strip's separation from the rest of the Mojave. Music is used sparingly. Much of the time, there is no background score during exploration. Instead, ambient sounds take precedence. Wind moving through empty terrain, distant machinery, and occasional wildlife noises fill the silence. This silence is intentional. It creates space for thought and reinforces solitude. When music does play, it often feels like a gentle reminder rather than a command for emotional response. The radio stations serve a specific atmospheric purpose. They provide continuity and familiarity without urgency. Songs repeat, announcements are calm, and the tone remains steady regardless of events. Mr. New Vegas's voice exemplifies this approach. His delivery is smooth, neutral, and unhurried. He does not dramatize events. Even significant developments are presented with casual detachment. This reinforces emotional distance rather than excitement. The music selection itself emphasizes nostalgia and simplicity. Songs often reflect themes of longing, love, and memory rather than action or conflict. This contrast softens the harshness of the wasteland. Hearing cheerful or sentimental music while traveling through ruins creates a layered emotional experience. The music does not mock the environment, it coexists with it, suggesting continuity rather than irony. Ambient sound design fills gaps without crowding. Footsteps echo subtly. Wind shifts direction. Mechanical hums suggest distant infrastructure. These sounds ground the player in space without drawing focus. Combat music is brief and understated. It signals danger but fades quickly afterward. The return to silence reinforces calm rather than adrenaline. Time also affects perception of the world. Long sessions of exploration create familiarity. Routes become routine. Landmarks become reference points. This repetition builds comfort rather than boredom. Fast travel exists, but its use is optional. Many players choose to walk simply because the environment supports it. Movement itself becomes part of the experience. The Pip-Boy interface reinforces this measured pace. Navigation is straightforward. Menus are functional. There are no flashy transitions or animations. Everything feels designed to be used calmly. Waiting mechanics allow players to pass time intentionally. This reinforces the idea that time is a resource rather than an obstacle. Waiting is not punished. NPC schedules are subtle but present. Characters occupy different spaces at different times of day. These small movements reinforce the sense of a living world without demanding attention. Nighttime in the Mojave is quiet rather than threatening. Darkness limits visibility, but danger does not increase dramatically. This allows night travel without constant stress. The sky itself contributes to atmosphere. Clear stars, distant clouds, and sunrise gradients emphasize openness. The desert feels vast rather than enclosed. Environmental repetition reinforces stillness. Similar terrain stretches for long distances. This consistency creates rhythm rather than monotony. This rhythm supports the game's sleep-friendly quality. There are extended periods with minimal dialogue or action. The world breathes slowly. Sound effects are not exaggerated. Gunfire is sharp but brief. Explosions are rare. Most interactions are quiet. The lack of constant reminders or objectives reinforces immersion. The game does not frequently interrupt exploration with alerts or notifications. Quest markers exist, but they do not dominate the screen. Navigation relies on the player's awareness rather than constant guidance. This subtlety reduces cognitive load. The player is not constantly processing new information. Dialogue pacing matches the overall tone. Conversations unfold without urgency. NPCs do not rush their words. Pauses feel natural. This calm delivery makes long conversations comfortable rather than exhausting. Listening becomes easier over time. The passage of in-game time mirrors real-world relaxation. Hours can pass quietly without significant events. This reinforces the sense of being present rather than progressing. New Vegas rarely forces emotional peaks. Even climactic moments are understated. This restraint prevents fatigue. The world feels indifferent to the player. Events occur whether or not the courier intervenes. This reduces pressure. Ambient music cues are minimal. When they appear, they are subtle and often loop gently. The Mojave's soundscape avoids chaos. Even crowded areas maintain a controlled auditory environment. This control reinforces mental stillness. There are few sudden loud noises outside of combat. The repetition of radio songs becomes comforting. Familiarity replaces novelty. Time spent walking becomes meditative. The desert does not demand reaction. This design supports extended play sessions without exhaustion. The game does not overload senses. The sense of stillness also enhances emotional distance. The player observes rather than participates constantly. New Vegas does not try to keep attention through constant novelty. It trusts the environment. This trust allows the player to settle into the world's rhythm. Atmosphere becomes cumulative rather than immediate. The feeling emerges gradually. Silence becomes a feature rather than a gap. The Mojave feels ancient, patient, and unconcerned. The game's restraint allows imagination to fill space. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is overstated. Time passes gently. And as hours drift by under the desert sky, with distant music humming softly through a radio speaker and long roads stretching ahead, Fallout New Vegas reveals one of its quietest strengths, a world that does not ask to be conquered or solved, but simply inhabited, slowly and calmly, as the sun rises and sets again and again, leaving the Mojave unchanged, waiting, and still.